Hello, this is Pixel Freak, and this is part 59 of the Final Fantasy Dimensions walkthrough. So we just left town, and we are headed for the next dungeon. The last part, there wasn't a whole lot that went on. That was just the town. There was a couple story elements that happened there. Pretty typical for this section of the game where you start out, you go to a town, they kind of give you a little bit of story about what's going to happen. At this point, you're following ninjas. Pretty soon there's going to be one that joins your team. Can't remember if we're headed towards the forest or the mountains. Either way, there will be ninjas. There will be lots and lots of ninjas. Looks like mountains to me. Akame, oh, so close. Not really mountains, it's a valley. So in this particular zone, you're going to kind of chase after some ninjas, and there's these two rival ninja factions that kind of play out. There's a little bit of a story that goes along with it as you go through this zone. Eventually you kind of side with one of them. If you didn't know, these were kind of spoilers, but not really. I mean, you're watching a walkthrough. Expect it. It's coming. At this point in the game, though, something that's interesting to mention is that I'm starting to actually shape my team as far as jobs are concerned. Up until this point, I've only been using a single job type for everybody. This is the first video, or the first set of videos, I should say, where I'm starting to really diversify and pick some secondary jobs for my characters. And I think I've already talked about this a little bit before, but at this point in my secondary jobs, I've become a little bit better. I die a lot less, or at least, go really low on health a lot less. Particularly with my Dark Knight, which is knocked. You just gotta be really careful with those guys. You can't put auto battle on with your Dark Knight abilities without substantial amounts of healing, because they use their health to cast their skills, and so they'll die very quickly. So you gotta keep up with that. Hey, rearrange characters a little bit here. So Glaive is my monk. He's primarily a monk, and I start to do warrior a little bit with him. But if I remember correctly, I don't think I go deep down warrior. Though that wouldn't be too bad of a job to do as a third job. There is enough points, aside from the extra points that you can get from the enemy that you beat at the end of the game. You can get a whole bunch of points at the end of the game if you want to, towards the end of the game. But in the game, just going through, finishing the main quest, you get something like 50-some points, 56 I think it is. That's enough to do 3 full jobs and then some partial, if you would like to. I don't think it'd be too bad of an idea for Glaive to go maybe even partial on warrior and then full ninja, full monk. Because Glaive ends up going ninja. And it's actually a really good path for him too. With the dual wield, I really like the ninja. Makes him very powerful. Sorry, with the dual wield. I like the monk with dual wield. It's really nice. That's the way I'm going. And I can only imagine with the warrior, I think at level 13 picks up the strength 20% boon. And so tack that on with a dual wielding monk. That's some pretty powerful stuff right there. Or even, in fact, the ninja has a dual wield, and then you put monk skills on that ninja, and then put the 20% strength on. That'd be very nice. That'd be some good stuff. You can see here Diana, and I think I've already explained this once, but Diana's doing Red Mage now to accompany her White Mage, and that's because Red Mage at like level 19 or 20 gets double cast. And I can only imagine that that's going to be extremely powerful as a white magic user to use. She might go... I'm not sure what we're going to do for her third job. Since it's the Dark team, they don't get Seer. Probably would have made a little more sense for me to use the other White Mage on the other team to go White Mage, Seer, and Red Mage. That probably would have made more sense. But I didn't, and it doesn't really matter that much. I think the only thing I'm going to be... It's not helping very much when I'm hitting that Purobolos with fire spells. Had to take off my auto battle there. Alright, there we go. I always hate that when I'm trying to go one way and the touchscreen controls, I mean, they work pretty well for an RPG like this, but you end up taking an extra couple steps once in a while when you touch just the wrong area on the screen. So you end up doing a couple extra steps, and a lot of times that ends up with an extra battle here or there. It's a bummer, especially in this game that, I mean, the fights are so frequent that whenever you can avoid them is really nice. There was a couple dungeons I did that I just escaped from every single battle. That would actually be a really cool auto battle. Ninja gets a smoke screen ability that allows you to flee automatically. Just put that on and put everybody else on fight and then run through dungeons that way. Probably be very productive. That way you only have to fight the boss. And you can just grind between dungeons. I was playing a more modern RPG recently, Lost Odyssey, which I'm sure a lot of people listening to this probably are very familiar with that game. A lot of people see it as the crowning achievement as far as RPGs are considered for this most recent generation of consoles, and I don't know. I just disagree. It's not my type of game. My problem with it is that the fights are just so slow. I mean, it's set up real well, very similar to, say, Final Fantasy X, or even Dragon Quest. What was the one I recently played? 8, the one on PS2. It's just a turn-based combat system with, you know, a slight ATB, but it's not really like an active. The whole game stops, so it's trying to take somebody's turn. But there is a speed in it. There's a speed mechanic. I guess Dragon Quest didn't really have that too much. But the problem is that the turns happen so slowly that the fights just go on forever, and I feel like I'm just watching loading screens or something because all the animations take forever, and I just wish it moved quicker. Like Final Fantasy X, the battle system is still turn-based with somewhat of an ATB in it, but the battle happens really, really quickly. I mean, you choose a command for one guy, the next guy's turn comes up immediately, and you're able to start picking commands again. I think that Lost Odyssey needed to do that, but I think that due to technical reasons, they weren't able to get the game to work like that. They needed all that animation to cover up load times. I think they were loading skills. Like when you load a fight, when you get into a fight, there's a load time that's associated with loading up the fight because it's not optimized enough. So it takes like 10-15 seconds to get into the fight. And so what they do is they have a really long battle animation to enter the battle. And then they have a little scene where you see all your characters getting ready to fight. And then you kind of see the enemies, them getting ready to fight, and then you get to start taking turns. So because of that, to me, it's just so slow. It just it bogs the whole game down for me. That and the fact that the overall story of the game is relatively uninteresting. It starts out really good, and I really like the very beginning of it, but it just ends up really, really predictable, at least for me. I keep adding that in because these are just opinions. Most of this is opinion. The load times, that's not really opinions. Whether or not it's bad, I guess, is an opinion, but with as long as the load times are, if you were to say that was a good thing, or that even if you were to say that's acceptable, I would question your judgment, because they're not really acceptable. The game would be much better with very short load times, like Final Fantasy X. The story, though, that's debatable. Some people might like Lost Odyssey's story, just like Final Fantasy XII. I didn't like the story that much. I wasn't surprised ever by it. It seemed overly political, but some people really like it, and I can understand that that's their opinion, and that's completely fine. There's no need for debate there, you know, just different preferences. One thing that was really cool, though, about Lost Odyssey was they did these little cutscenes where, like, you regain your memories throughout the game, and they tell you these really long, drawn-out text stories, and some people might find them really boring. I thought they were some of the most amazing fantasy writing that I had read in a long time, because they were these really cool collection of, like, short stories. And it would take you, like, 15-20 minutes to read each one, because they were really long stories, but they were really interesting. I liked them. I haven't read all of them, but I read quite a few. So I did some editing right there by that save spot because I ended up going back to it a few times, and you saw that I used a tent there. Obviously, if your health is low enough, I highly recommend you using a cabin and not a tent because you're going to want it full. Oh, what kind of luck is that? Getting a battle like right before you get the treasure box. That sucks. Alright, so here's the boss. This is kind of the showdown from one ninja team to the next. Oh, I'm sorry. The boss comes up in just a short couple little pieces up here. Same thing happens. He gets surrounded, but you bail him out in the next piece. It's where he really gets overwhelmed. There, they were just showing his might. That's how strong he is. He took out 4 ninjas, whereas we're killing like giant lizards and evil unicorns. Evil unicorns. A staple of Final Fantasy. Evil unicorns. Those have been around since the first one. I remember it was. I think that was the first time you see him, but you run into an enemy called Nightmare, and the place where the rat tail is, the castle, the trials. I think they show up before then once or twice. The first Final Fantasy actually used a whole lot of recolors for enemies, mostly because it was a NES game. You really had to do that. There wasn't an option. In a game like this, they don't need to do recolors. Now they're just recoloring characters because, well, it takes more time to draw new ones, and so it's a shortcut. An Android game, you can make that as big as you'd like, and they can put, there's plenty of room and resources to do as many different models as you'd like to. In a Nintendo game, that's not necessarily the case because you have to render everything, and everything's got to be stored in memory, and there was not a lot of resources to go around in those NES games. Even Super Nintendo games, same thing. There's a constraint on resources in those games. I just read a recent article about the making of Final Fantasy VI. It was kind of funny because it was called The Making of Final Fantasy VI, and with a title like that, you think it's going to be a very comprehensive article, and they're going to talk about a lot of things. It was about 1.5 pages, 2 pages, and I can't remember which blog had published it, but it was an interesting article. But one of the cool gems in the article was, towards the end, one of the guys that worked on Final Fantasy III, which is 6, for those keeping track. He said there was more creativity back in those days because there was constraints, and when you have constraints, that makes you have to innovate more about your game, which is an interesting point, and I've heard that many times before. People that have worked in games for 20 years and seen the constraints on 16-bit and 8-bit systems, and now they have like this very open canvas where you can just do anything you want to. People say that there was more creativity in those days because they were constrained more. So I think this is the part here where he gets jumped. And I'm wrong again. I'll just keep being wrong for a while. Alright, there's the red-haired ninja. Eventually they catch up to him. Unless I'm completely wrong. Like, I could just be spacing it. It's been a little while now since I've played this part. I could be wrong, and maybe this isn't the place they catch up with him. Maybe it's another dungeon they catch up to him. But I'd be surprised. I'm almost positive this is where they catch up with him, and then you basically defy him, and you take him down. You save the blue-haired ninja. Blue-haired ninja. This guy joins your team. He was on my team for several dungeons, and I don't even have the goal to remember his name. And that, in summation, is how I feel about the storyline of Final Fantasy Dimensions. Not to say that it's an awful storyline, it's very forgettable. The middle of the game, chapters 2 and 3, both combined, are entirely forgettable. You remember what happens in the first chapter? They could have just taken 2 and 3 out, and then just stapled 1 to 4, and it would have been an amazing story, because it all makes sense. Like, in chapter 1, the whole dimensional everything splits, and then you play out all this stuff in the center, and then you come back together. The problem is that everything that happened in the center doesn't really matter. None of it really adds to the story. I mean, you're running around, sure, you're grabbing crystals, but when the world comes back together here, and it's not too much longer that the world starts to come back together, nothing's changed. The only thing that's different is that your characters have grown. They don't really give too much of a reason behind it. There's just like, oh, you're strong now, so now we can, you know, unlock everything and the dimension will come back together. It's dumb. It's dumb that it's that way. They wrote the story very lazily. This was a patchwork story, and the whole game design actually ended up being very much like that. I mean, they basically just took all the old elements from the old games, tried to make a nostalgic experience by replicating those. They kind of threw them together in this Final Fantasy stew, put a patchwork story on it, and then they just repeated the same mechanic over and over through the game. For that reason, I think that this game's mediocre at best. It's a mediocre Final Fantasy. It's way better than Mystic Quest, but yeah. So yeah, it must be in a future part that we save that ninja and he joins our team. It wasn't this piece. That just makes me look stupid, but whatever, we're gonna go with it. That's going to be it for this piece of the walkthrough. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and until next time, this has been Pixel Freak.